Okay. Hi everyone. You look great today. How are you enjoying Edinburgh? Okay, I'm for the first time in here and I love it. I love it. The moment I came, saw all those, picturesque buildings and hills and everything. It's really great. I've heard from people before that it's a great place to be, to see. But I thought, yeah, everybody says the same about, places they like, right? So every place is special, every place is beautiful. It is great in here. Going to a tech conference, because those days is a tech conference after all, when I came up with the idea of speaking about philosophy, I first thought that I would be thought of as a freak, because, okay, guys talking about philosophy, what that has to do with us. And I was amazed to see that I'm not alone in here. We even have a philosophy graduate, Nick Knight, who's speaking tomorrow. And I guess on a similar topics as mine. So if you want to see different perspective, definitely see this Ignite. And Mike here just mentioned about Aristotle, who's also a philosopher. So philosophy is not that freakish it looks. We also have a lot of topics about culture in general. So I think my talk would be quite in place, and also I'm trying to bring not only this high ideas on how to think about things, but also show some tools that can help us implement it. So my name is Piotr Gaczkowski, and I imagine this might be very hard for you to pronounce, so you can just call me Piotr, or Peter is fine as well. It's probably the easiest way for most people. I'm a software developer, I would say, just as Mike, though I always wanted to be a system administrator when I was, quite young. But since I couldn't find a job in this place, I started with software development, and later on it developed into very different fields. At this moment, I try to focus my energy on enabling people to experience more from the tech world. So I do trainings, I write articles, I am writing a book that is going quite slowly. I'm producing my first video course as well. So I like to share my knowledge with people, with those that I think can benefit from the joys of tech, or however should we call it. If you want to see the slides, I think they're visible from everywhere, but anyway, there's a link above that you can use to check them on your own devices. You can find me on different places on the web if you ever have a need for that. So to define the egoless programming, we first have to find out what is ego actually. There are different ways to approach this problem because basically different branches of science have different definitions for the same word. I'll go with something that I feel instinctively would help us here. So ego is basically the self. It's what makes us us. It's the driving force that makes me feel special, but it makes me feel special in my own little world that resides in my own little head. And all of you probably here have some conception of self that others probably don't see. Others see you differently, you see yourself differently. That's one of the definitions of ego. Another definition of ego may be a force that puts our own interest over everyone else's. It's basically a survival mechanism. We need to survive, we need to, reproduce, we need to spread our genes, etc. We are programmed this way. So sometimes we think that we have to take advantage over others to have our goals fulfilled. This is the same ego that forms the egoist or egotist words. So they're unpleasant words, they're something we don't want to be, but there's also ego involvement in them. And there are also times when ego can be understood as our inner critic. So it would be the voice that speaks to us and saying that we do great things or that we do bad things, our internal feedback loop. There are some dangers related with ego, and yeah, there are definitely dangers related with ego in everyday life, but there are also some dangers related to ego that are especially painful in software development. One of them is that following one's ego can lead to terrible APIs. I would go into the consequences of that a bit later on. Now let's just enumerate those problems and keep those in mind. We'll get back to them. The not invented here syndrome is also a very, very huge problem stemming from ego. Do you know what's not invented here syndrome? Recreating something that's already there because we think that we will do it better, because the other party has no idea how to do it properly and we will do it properly. I would say that the proliferation of different Linux distributions, for example, is a kind of not invented here syndrome, but not always. Sometimes there are entirely valid reasons to create a new software distribution. Sometimes it's just that we disagree with others and want to live with the consequences of our own choice. Another problem is ego clashes. And you can see ego clashes when you have a team or two different teams, and people on this team don't think in terms of, playing on the same field, having a same goal. They're thinking about how can I personally contribute from it and how can I protect myself against the doings of others. So it's a bit of a panic mode, I would say, but it can be prolonged and can be very painful very painful for the teamwork, very painful for the team, very painful for the company. The problems here accumulate. And the entrenched code ownership is another thing that comes from or with ego. That's a huge problem. You might say, okay, but we learned that code ownership, we heard from the blogs and from other conferences that code ownership is something we should strive for, that people should be responsible for the code they produce, that if a code has an author, then that author would make sure that this code is of good enough quality. The author wouldn't want to release something that's terrible. Yes, that's the good part of code ownership. There are good parts and the bad parts in most things. It's like with our immunity system, right? It's great that we have it, but when there are some pathologies in it, it can get very, very bad. So for example, entrenched code ownership would mean, no, I won't accept this pull request, even though it is sensible, because I don't think it fits in here. It's my code. It's always been done this way. Also, whenever you hear it's always been done this way, a red light should light up in your head, because this is usually some form of ego play, that someone feels assaulted and without the resources to better defend themselves, they just use this excuse. So co-ownership can also go too far. You can have, you know, too much of a good thing and make it a problem to yourself. Okay, we know what's ego. We know what problems may stem from it. Before we dive into different approaches to philosophy, different approaches of philosophy to ego, let's start with what philosophy is actually all about, because not every one of you may understand it the same way as I do. And yeah, once again, I'm not a philosophy graduate. My understanding of philosophy is, I shall say, casual. So maybe it's incorrect. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm fine with that. Many people think that philosophers are those, you know, ancient bearded guys that were just walking down the beach, reading books, writing books, thinking about the books, discussing ideas related in the books that had basically no absolute meaning in the real world. People were busy trying to grow some crops, producing different manufacturing, basically the food, art, tools, whatever, and those guys were just walking, talking, and thinking about how we get there and where are we headed. So they may seem totally useless to life, they may seem especially useless to business, but actually the philosophers also were focused on things that we might find close to us, like, for example, the problems of logics, the problems of ethics, right? Many social or political constructs have been also derived from the works of various philosophers. So if you ever caught up yourself thinking about, I don't know, logics, ethics, things like that, you might call yourself a philosopher as well. It's not only, you know, abstract things, metaphysical things, it's also things that can happen in everyday life, and those things also happen every day in tech. Nowadays, with the, you know, rising popularity of AI and ML, there are different problems related to ethics in AI. So that's one of the applications of that. One of the philosophies I want to mention is Stoicism. It comes from ancient Greek. It's been also practiced by ancient Romans, and recently I think it's having a rebirth, because many different tech celebrities, marketing celebrities are suddenly discovering Stoicism and telling us that this is basically the answer to all of our problems, and with our, you know, cultural challenges that we face, it's the best way to go forward. But in my, as I said, casual understanding of Stoicism, the main focus here is what is and what is not under my control. So suppose you wake up today and you're looking outside, it's cloudy, and you're thinking, okay, is it gonna rain? Is it not gonna rain? If it rains, it would ruin my clothes, it would ruin my mood. What can I do? I have no idea what to do. I can't go outside because it might start raining. You know, there are many problems that you generate with that. A Stoic approach would be, okay, looks like it's gonna rain. I better take on my, you know, rainproof clothes on and see how it is. Everything is under my control. Believe it or not, when I was looking for an image representing a Stoic, the only relevant thing I could find was this cat. And I thought that's okay, why not? Let's use it. I think the cats are Stoics after all. And when it comes to the perception of ego, there's also this feeling of being in control. When someone calls you, for example, a poor excuse for an engineer, you might feel offended, right? You are under control, your ego is under control, so the natural thing to do would be to defend yourself, to say, no, I'm not, I'm totally not, I know what I'm doing, it's perfectly fine. That's the loss of control, actually. A Stoic's approach would be to think in different terms, not only about the immediate danger to our well-being, but does this offense affect our well-being long-term? Can it be even, taken as a truth? Is this person trustworthy? Does this opinion count? Can it, can it hurt our status, our position? Or maybe it can hurt the offender even more by showing that this person lost control and we are totally fine, and we can prove that this just isn't happening. So Stoicism helps us listen to our ego, but also make this conversation inside our head, whether what ego tells us is the absolute truth, or is it only, a response to some temporary offense or temporary, this inconvenience. After the Stoics, another philosophers, I would say, that had an interesting approach to ego were the various Christian thinkers. There were two quotes, I would say, or credos people wanted to live by. One was the Soli Deo Gloria, which means glory to God alone, which we can translate to the layman terms that we should not take the credit for everything we do. We are always part of some bigger environment, and we should always consider this environment and give the credit due. For example, I've heard that Johann Sebastian Bach started signing his works with the initials SDG, and when he started doing that, his works improved because he wasn't only thinking about how can he show his genius to the audience, but how can he benefit the audience by doing his work. Similar approach was Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam. This was used by Jesuits, and it meant for the greater glory of God. Basically similar things, and we can see how they work when we look at the process of building a cathedral. So imagine we are transported in time a few hundred years, and we approach a construction person that's laying bricks on the construction site. You ask, okay, what are you doing? And the person says, oh, yeah, don't ask. I'm laying bricks the whole day, in the heat, in the rain, in the winds, in the snow. We are laying those bricks, the work is endless. We'll never finish it during my lifetime. We're shown no gratitude. The people are always yelling at us, but, I have a family, I have to support them, so that's the thing I have to do. You can approach his colleague and ask, okay, and what are you doing? Yes, we're building a cathedral, This would be the most spectacular thing ever produced in this world. It would be amazing. Okay, well, I cannot attest to it because I probably won't live long enough, because this can take like several hundred years to complete, but believe me, the future generations would think that we are doing extraordinary job. I love it. I absolutely love it. So what's the difference in those two approaches? You see it? The first approach is ego-driven. What I can get from this work. The second approach considers the bigger picture. The final thing, no, it's not the final thing. It's second to last as far as philosophies goes. Is the Buddhism, Zen philosophies, generally the philosophies and belief systems of the East. When we are communicating with Western culture, people usually like to practice individualism. We all believe that we are some kind of special, that we are the chosen ones to do anything, that it is I that should be the most important person in the room. In the Eastern philosophies, the focus is more on collective. How can I benefit the collective I live in? How can I benefit my family? How can I benefit my my town, my country, and not on the beliefs of the needs of the person in question. So in Buddhism, there's this focus on feeling and being a part of a greater universe. It's not just how can I approach things as an individual, but how can I make myself basically disappear and become a part of the universe. This is also even a basis for the jokes. I don't know if you recognize this one. This is a Zen monk that comes to a hot dog stand, and the person at the counter asks, okay, how can I help you? What can I do for you? And the Zen monk replies, make me one with everything. I like it. Unlike many jokes, I don't think it's offending, so I like it very much. Yes, and the last philosophy I wanted to focus on is the DevOps philosophy. Because in a keynote we've heard that DevOps has many different meanings, many different definitions. For me, DevOps is something akin to philosophy or to culture, the way we do things. And if we look at it, if we look at closing the gap between the client and the development, the short release cycles, iterative approach to design, the reduce of waste, all those things have one thing in common. They naturally blend together, because if we want to achieve them, if we want those shorter release cycles, we want closing the gap, we want everything to be less wasteful, running more smoothly, it all requires building a kind of communication framework. We need to communicate better. We need to feel like we are the part of one collective. Not that, they are those guys, clients, that want something from us. It's that we're building something that we all can benefit from. And with communication and with shared goals comes the one requirement that's relevant to the title of this presentation, that they all require us to put our ego aside. We have to stop thinking for a moment about the personal benefits we can gain from this task, project, or whatever. We have to think how we can be more connected, feel like, one bigger organism, and defend the needs of the bigger organism, not only the smaller cells. And how ego disrupts DevOps. We're back to the points that we discussed earlier. When you have terribly designed APIs, this is a source of waste. One source of waste is because you have to look up documentation more often, so you have to be more focused on doing things. There are more opportunities for you to mess things up. And the other source of waste is that, yeah, once you mess things up and they end up in production, this would be really costly to fix. So APIs should be easy to use and hide the complexities inside, not the other way around, right? Not invented here syndrome, like, I think it's an obvious source of waste. You just focus your attentions not on delivering a good product, but on trying to show somebody else that you're better than whoever developed the original solution that you want to use. Ego clashes also present different sources of waste. First of all, developers focus developers. Basically, everyone on the team. It doesn't necessarily mean software developers, product developers, shall we say. So this can mean designers, operations, business, clients, whoever is involved in it. It wastes energy. Instead of focusing energy on creating, you're focusing energy on defending yourself against different, often not existent attacks. And the other source of waste is that ego clashes can lead to decay in culture, and decay in culture in turn would mean that your team would dissolve or stop working efficiently and effectively. Entrenched code ownership at one extremity can lead to the not invented here syndrome. On the other way, it can also reduce your buzz factor to 1. If you're not familiar with the term buzz factor, it's, I think, coined by Guido Rossum of the Python fame. He said, okay, how many people have to get hit by a buzz until there's nobody who knows how your project works? So if you have only one person who has all the knowledge, if this person disappears, get hit by a metaphorical buzz, usually it means, you know, change of employer, you're left with nothing. So cultural tools for egoless programming. First of all, create a culture. In the book, The Culture Code, there are 3 pillars of the good company or team culture. It's the safety, vulnerability, and shared future. If people know they are safe, if people share their vulnerabilities, their problems and challenges with each other, and if they share some future, they know that they will get better with time, the great culture can emerge. Second thing, you can introduce some formal processes. I think that some of you might object in here, but I'm not telling you to, you know, start introducing bureaucracy. It's just that formal processes can help people feel less lost in what's happening. And those formal processes would probably just appear from the culture you are cultivating. It's not that you would have to force them. They would be a natural progress. Another cultural tool is doing code reviews. When people are getting familiar with the code they are producing and everyone knows what's happening where, not only what are the features I'm working on. And pair programming can also be a good cultural tool to leave the ego aside and focus on how to improve the overall product. Once everything is, you know, similar, once people know what they're doing, once everyone has the same name, the things are much, much easier to work with. There are also software tools for egoless programming. I've focused on the examples in Python because it's still language that's closest to my heart, but you will probably find them everywhere. Linters are one of the best tools that everyone should use, I think. These are the tools that can check your code They're also called static analysis tools that can check your code, whether it contains any known bugs that can be seen just by reading the code. When you're using linters, people doing code reviews don't have to check everything for correctness. They can focus more on the overall code quality. Code formatters, for me, are at the same time the hardest and the easiest thing that you can do. Code formatters basically take a code and format it according to some standards. It doesn't matter what standards you want to apply, it's just that they are consistent, that everybody writes the same code. For me, I usually take just, for example, YAP and use the defaults because I believe that somebody made this choices for me, and that's fine. There are also some auxiliary tools for Python. It's PyAnnotate and MyPy that can help you create better interfaces, better APIs, type checking, and stuff. And Git hooks. Git hooks were mentioned earlier, and Git hooks are a thing that run whenever you do an action in Git. So if you are committing something, if you are pushing something, you can program Git to run some checks. So for example, I've made a quick fix for some problem discovered, right? And I didn't have even the energy left to make it format well or do other things. So Git hooks would just run linters on it, code formatters, they would run auxiliary tools, they would run all the tests, even before I push to the main repository when the hopefully continuous integration process would check it, and before it gets to my peers for a code review. Another tool for egoless programming is scripting and automation, making build scripts. I love makefiles. They're quite ancient, but I haven't still found a better way to automate certain things. If you have makefiles, then your continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline can be reduced basically to calling make build, make deploy, make test, make whatever. And those same steps could be reproduced on any other machine, on your developers' machines, QA machines, whatever there is. It doesn't require the whole CI/CD pipeline to just do those things. Opinionated frameworks are another easy and hard thing to use. It's hard to, make your team understand why we need to use this opinionated framework instead of another one. But it's easiest because somebody have made some choices for you and you don't have to sweat about it. It's just perfectly fine. The final tool, it's a bit software-based, a bit cultural-based, is behavior-driven development. So instead of just writing tests as in whether this code behaves correctly, you first try to assess with your client, with business, what is it that you want to achieve with this bit of code? What business purpose does it have? And if you have that, you can validate whether you're making progress towards delivering this needs. It is also a great way to encourage communication between the different stakeholders, because suddenly everyone's on board. Those tests are written in a language that business can understand, but they also have the code background that works in CI/CD. I wanted to share some tales of horror that I've personally experienced, but I think we're running a bit short on time. Yeah, we're running a bit short on time. So I'll maybe skip the tales of horror and I can share some of them with you, on the backstage during lunch or whatever. But yeah, they're definitely, I believe every one of you has seen some ego issues in development, in production, and know how bad can they be. So the point I wanted to make is that using the tools And using a proper philosophy, like a DevOps philosophy, can help you write better code and reduce waste. So why is that important for you personally? This time we don't leave our egos aside, but look out what's in it for me. For me and for you, we can work less and play more. We don't need to spend hours coding and fixing things. We can do them once, do them good enough, improve, do several rounds of implementation, and go home, play. Programming is fun. I love it. I believe most of you love it as well. But playing a ball is also quite fun, and let's not forget it that there's much more to life than work. Thank you very much.